back, everyone. Ready to dive into another chilling mystery. This time we're heading back to Victorian London, to the fog and shadows of Jack the Ripper.
A classic for a reason, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And we've got a ton of sources to unpack, historical accounts, newspaper clippings from the time, even some true crime.
You've really assembled quite the collection. It's amazing what you can find.
It's all about those primary sources. It's like piecing together a puzzle, trying to understand not just who Jack was, but the world that created him.
The why is always more interesting than the who, isn't it?
Precisely. So let's step back in time for a moment. Imagine the sights and sounds of London's East End in the late 1800s.
That's bustling, wasn't it?
Incredibly so. This is Whitechapel, a center of commerce, but also a place of stark contrasts. Imagine, if you will, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on cobblestone streets, vendors hawking their wares.
And the smells. You can practically smell the coal smoke, the fish from the markets.
And let's not forget the less pleasant aromas. Sanitation wasn't exactly a high priority in those times.
A far cry from the romanticized image of the Victorian era.
Exactly. Behind the facade of progress and prosperity, there was a darker reality. We're talking overcrowded slums, families crammed into single rooms.
Disease was rampant. Opportunity for many was nothing more than a cruel illusion.
And for women especially, the streets could be a dangerous place.
Sadly, many had few options. Prostitution became a way to survive, a desperate attempt to escape poverty.
And it's against this backdrop of societal tension that our story takes a sinister turn. A killer emerges, his victims, women, living and working in the shadows of Whitechapel.
And it wasn't just the killings themselves, but the brutality. The way each murder seemed to grip the city with fear.
The sources we have really don't hold back. And while we won't dwell on the gruesome details, it's this aspect, the savagery, that really captured the public's imagination, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it was fueled by something else that was evolving at the time, the media. Newspapers were becoming masters of sensationalism.
A media frenzy waiting to happen.
Precisely. And what better story to sell papers than a shadowy figure stalking the streets, preying on the vulnerable?
So how did they portray Jack? What kind of language did they use?
Oh, it was dramatic, to say the least. Headlines like, "Another horrible murder in Whitechapel," "The Fiend still at large." They gave him nicknames, too, each more chilling than the last. "Leather Apron," "The Whitechapel Fiend."
They painted quite the picture, didn't they?
They did, and with each new victim, the pressure on the police mounted.
Everyone became a suspect, right?
It seems that way. I mean, they investigated everyone from local butchers to recent immigrants.
Even whispers about the royal family.
The rumor mill was working overtime. It's a fascinating insight into the anxieties of the Victorian era. It really is incredible, isn't it? The lack of a clear suspect, the way the media fueled the flames of speculation, it all added to the mystique.
And it makes you wonder, looking back, did those suspicions reflect deeper anxieties? Were certain groups unfairly targeted because of who they were, where they came from?
Oh, absolutely. The Ripper case became a focal point for existing prejudices. Take immigrants, for example.
Already viewed with suspicion in London's East End.
Precisely. They became easy scapegoats. Then you had whispers about Jewish communities playing into those deeply ingrained anti-Semitic sentiments.
It's almost as if Jack the Ripper, whoever he was, became a blank slate onto which Victorian society projected its own fears.
Exactly. He wasn't just a killer, he was a symbol. A manifestation of the things lurking beneath the surface of polite society. The other, the unknown, all those anxieties about social order, about what happens when the world you thought you knew unravels.
Speaking of unraveling, did this case, as gruesome as it was, have any lasting impact on how crimes were investigated?
You know, it's interesting you ask that. Because in a way, yes, out of this darkness came a glimmer of progress.
Really? Tell me more.
Well, remember, this was a time when investigations relied heavily on eyewitness accounts, on intuition. But the Ripper's elusiveness, the way he seemed to vanish into thin air, it forced the police to rethink their methods.
So are we talking about the birth of modern forensics? Fingerprints, that sort of thing?
Not quite fingerprints just yet, but they were starting to understand the importance of the crime scene itself. The Ripper case pushed them to analyze physical evidence more systematically, to look for patterns, to try and understand the how of it all.
A turning point, then.
In a way, yes. It was a gradual shift, of course, but you could argue that Jack the Ripper, however unintentionally, played a role in moving us towards the more scientific approach we see in criminal investigations today.
Yeah, then there's the cultural impact. I mean, even now, over a century later, the case still fascinates us.
Doesn't it? Books, documentaries, you name it. We're still trying to solve the puzzle, to unmask the man behind the legend.
It's like a morbid tapestry woven from history and imagination.
And I think that's what makes it so compelling. It's the unanswered questions, the mystery that lingers.
A why of it all.
Exactly. It's a reminder that some mysteries never truly die, they just evolve. They become part of our collective consciousness.
And they force us to confront those uncomfortable truths, don't they? About the darker aspects of human nature, about the potential for evil that exists in every society.
In all of us, perhaps.
A sobering thought, for sure. But one worth pondering, I think, as we delve deeper into this case.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About the stories we tell, the ones that endure.
And the ones that haunt us. Which I suppose brings us to that lingering question, what if Jack hadn't vanished? What if the story didn't end in Whitechapel?
Ah, now you're tapping into something truly fascinating. Imagine, if you will, a fictional world
I like where this is going.
where a renowned criminologist, let's call him Sir Guy Hollis, becomes utterly fixated on the Ripper case.
Obsessed.
Completely. He's convinced that Jack found a way to cheat time to continue his work from the shadows.
Hold on, are we talking time travel now? Did Jack hop on a steamship to America?
Not literally, of course. But Sir Guy, haunted by those Whitechapel crimes, he starts to see echoes of them in 1930s Chicago. Every unsolved murder, every whisper in the night.
He sees Jack's handiwork.
Exactly. It's less about a literal resurrection and more about the idea that the darkness Jack embodied, it didn't die, it simply found new victims.
New streets to stalk.
Precisely. And this Sir Guy, he becomes fixated on finding him, on stopping him once and for all.
I can picture it now, our intrepid detective, armed with his theories and maybe a magnifying glass, searching for clues in those fog-choked alleyways. But why Chicago? What draws him there?
That's the thing about obsession, isn't it? Sometimes it leads you down the most unexpected paths. Sir Guy, he believes the Ripper sought a dark power, something to grant him immortality.
Immortality. Now that's a chilling thought.
And he believes these new killings, these echoes of Whitechapel, they hold the key to uncovering that power, to stopping Jack once and for all.
So it becomes a race against time, a battle against an enemy who may or may not be, well, entirely real.
And that's the beauty of this fictional exploration. It blurs the lines between reality and perception. Because, let's face it, the more Sir Guy looks for the Ripper, the more he's likely to find him, wouldn't you say?
Even if it's just in his own mind.
Exactly. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it speaks to something very real about the enduring legacy of Jack the Ripper.
That sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones we create ourselves.
The ones that linger in the shadows of our own minds.
And as we step out of the fog and back into the present, I think that's a pretty powerful thought to leave our listeners with today.
It certainly gives one pause, doesn't it? To think that some stories, some mysteries, they have a way of staying with us, of shaping how we see the world long after the headlines have faded.
Whether they're real or imagined. So, until next time, keep exploring those mysteries, keep asking questions, but be careful what lurks in the shadows of your own imagination.